Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin in Alberta, where a wildfire hit the town site of Jasper last night, destroying much of the popular tourist destination. APTN's Chris Stewart has the latest.
Images began showing up online last night of the damage done to the picturesque town of Jasper, Alberta. Buildings, hotels, and houses are seen on fire. The wildfire reached 300 to 400 feet in height. 25,000 people were evacuated earlier this week as the fire approached. Videos this morning on social media showed charred businesses, cars, and houses showing extensive damage. This afternoon, an emotional Danielle Smith said up to half the town has been destroyed.
Homes and businesses have been lost to a wildfire that people are calling a wall of flames. There is no denying that this is the worst nightmare for any community. To the residents of Jasper and those displaced far from home looking at the images of your town on TV and online, the feelings of loss and fear and loneliness must be overwhelming. But you are not alone. All Albertans are with you.
The Premier also made a promise to the community.
To the residents, families, and business owners who call Jasper home, we will recover from this. To the men and women on the front line and at all operational levels, thank you for your courage and commitment. And to those in Alberta and around the world who have experienced the magic of Jasper. The magic is not lost, and it never will be. Alberta's government will provide the support needed to families and community to recover and to rebuild stronger than ever.
Relief may be on the way for the beleaguered town, as heavy rainfall is expected, which will help firefighting efforts. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Meanwhile, 22 First Nations across Canada are currently being impacted by wildfires, according to the federal government. This is the scene near Marcel Colombe First Nation in northern Manitoba on Wednesday. It's roughly 1,100 kilometers north of Winnipeg, and hundreds of people have now been evacuated. According to the latest update from the province of Manitoba, there are two different fires burning less than 10 kilometers from the community. As of yesterday, the federal government says nearly 7,200 people from 7 First Nations across Canada are currently evacuated due to wildfires. This morning, the Senate released a new report called Missing Records, Missing Children. Its goal is to get the government to provide better and more timely access to residential school records. They may contain key information about the lives and deaths of Indigenous children at those schools. Fraser Needham has more.
Senator Brian Francis is the chair of the Senate's Committee on Indigenous Peoples. He says there are a number of reasons why survivors and the public at large are not able to access residential school records in the manner they should.
There's lack of human resources to do the job and lack of financial resources to do the job properly. Those are critical areas that have to be covered off in order for this work to take place, because as I mentioned earlier, the records are scattered out across Canada, very little information on them. It's going to take some deep dive into them to get the proper information out. So it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of coordination to bring this about properly.
The Senate committee interviewed dozens of witnesses over the past several months, which resulted in Missing Records, Missing Children. The report makes 11 recommendations, including calling on the government to compel the Catholic Church to release records to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, or NCTR, fund Indigenous-led approaches to locating records, and adequately fund the Residential Schools Documents Advisory Committee to assist in locating and transferring records to the NCTR. Francis says it is particularly important that accessing and transferring documents be led by Indigenous institutions, such as the NCTR.
We know how to do the work. There are people. We know what has to be done. We know how to interview our survivors properly and so on. And I think it's just critical that we lead it as Indigenous people.
In an emailed statement, the NCTR fully supports all of the report's recommendations, particularly with respect to the transfer and release of residential school records into its care. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A First Nation in BC has reached a multi-million-dollar settlement with the federal government over a dispute about water rights that date back to the late 1800s. The Esquetemek First Nation in the Caribou region of BC will receive $147.6 million from the federal government for lost water rights for 131 years. During the 1890s, members of that First Nation began digging an irrigation ditch to their reserve using only picks and shovels. The government forced them to stop just 1 kilometer from their goal to access water. And then in 1925, water rights from the nearby Vert Lake were taken from the First Nation and granted to settlers in the area instead. Again, the First Nation was left without water. More than 20 years ago, the nation filed a claim over the loss of the value of land and the crops that could have been grown there. Chief Fred Robbins of the First Nation says there is already plans to use the funds to increase services needed for its members.
Excited about the future that we can provide for the next generation. I'm also looking at different opportunities for this community moving forward. The fact that we're put on these little rock piles, I think Esquetemek is in a unique situation because we have a total of 16 small parcels of reserve lands throughout our backyard here. But these small parcels, they're all poor worthless land according to the Indian agent that mapped out these reserves. So we're looking at seeing how we can provide a better service for our community members.
The Dene Nation is selecting a new national chief. Details on that and our Truth and Politics panel coming up after the break. Welcome back. The Indian Brotherhood of the Northwest Territories was established in 1969, and ever since they've had a leader. This week it's time to choose the next national chief for the Dene Nation. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs brings us that story.
There's a record number of candidates vying for national chief of the Dene Nation. Usually there's only 2 candidates, so typically a single vote elects the leader. But with 6 candidates, the rules have been altered, and the winner must nab 51% majority of the ballots cast. Despite skepticism to change the Constitution, delegates gave it the green light. Speeches began with former National Chief Norman Yakalula of Toledo, who once served as MLA in the territories.
When I was an MLA and I thought I knew everything, I was going to change the world as an MLA for the Sawtooth. Because I saw the injustice going on in our communities, with the housing, the education. We got to put the government in the Northwest Territories on notice. You're no longer going to be around once we get our act together as a nation.
Next, Katlodiche First Nation Chief April Martel talked about tackling the addictions issues in the NWT.
And we also need to make the RCMP responsible to help us and assist us in the communities when it comes to drug dealing, when it comes to eviction of drug dealers in our communities. We have BCRs that we evict our drug dealers, but we need to push the RCMP to assist in taking those drug dealers out and improving our justice system in the communities and our victim services. We have too many victims in our small communities.
Incumbent Gerald Antoine is a veteran politician who served as Grand Chief of the Deitcho First Nations. He gave this emotional reflection on his time in office.
I saw the machinery and the moving parts in your communities, at the region, here at Dene Nation, and at the national level. I see that you're not into it.
Meanwhile, former Satu MLA Paulichina of Fort Good Hope spoke towards her 2 decades working for the territorial government.
But I feel that we are not recognized as strongly as we should be. I feel that our people in the smaller communities are not treated with adequate housing, with adequate services when it also comes to mental health. I think that as Dene Nation, as Dene, why can't we take over those services? Why can't we administer it? And why aren't we at the table and accessing further funding through AFN?
Former Cleancho Grand Chief George McKenzie says more needs to be done to get students to graduate.
They got to find a way for the teachers to stay longer in our community. And one way that we did it is we took the teachers out on the land on weekends. Volunteer work we did. We didn't get paid for it. Because of that, some teachers stayed for 7 years. Even one teacher stayed for 14 years.
Finally, former Smith's Landing First Nation Chief Jerry Cheesy of Fort Smith wants to further the distance between the Dene Nation and the GNWT.
They have proven to be ineffective in just about every aspect of our lives. They have an annual budget of $2.2 billion. Does any of that money go into your communities? Very little. Why are we, the owners of the land, beggars in our own homeland?
Results are scheduled to be announced no later than 8 p.m. Thursday night, which will be followed by a swearing-in ceremony. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Dada.
Thanks, Charlotte. A move by the federal government to cap the amount of money allocated to search the grounds of former residential schools has disappointed and outraged many. Communities could previously receive up to $3 million per year through the Residential Schools Missing Children Community Support Fund, but funding will now be capped at $500,000. Our Truth and Politics panel is here to discuss the changes. Jennifer Lewitz is a partner with Pasqua Harbor Strategies, and Negon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, Negon, thanks for being with us. Jennifer, the federal government says capping the amount of money for searches at former residential school sites is necessary to take a sustainable approach to provide funding to as many communities as possible. Your thoughts on that?
I think now is not the time to be doing that. Now, there's a lot of communities that were just getting in the middle of establishing their committees and understanding how they're actually going to approach this. So I think with the federal government coming down and saying, actually, you know what, we're going to cut the funding and we're also going to restrict the areas that you can search that will be funded is a little bit of a problem. And it really brings into question how much the government is willing to participate in reconciliation, especially as it comes to learning about the truth behind unmarked graves and giving the nations the capacity to search what might be there.
Negon, used to be $3 million, I believe, down to $500,000. What do you make of this substantial cutback?
There's certainly public pressure that's being put on the government by certain forces, certain political forces that are saying things like, show us the bodies, show us the evidence that these anomalies are unmarked graves. I mean, anyone who says that simply doesn't understand science. The fact is that these graves are oftentimes very difficult to discern. They're also very difficult to find. And what we're looking for isn't skeletal remains as much as it is human DNA, which is kind of like saying, looking for a needle in a haystack, especially in huge areas of soil where unmarked graves are suggested to have been. The fact is that, nearly 10,000 students went to schools, disappeared. No one has ever heard from or seen since. The fact is that those children have to be found, and that is a mark on all Canadians, on every single part of the legacy of residential schools, and the Canadian government has a responsibility to step up and whatever it takes to help communities find their children.
Jennifer, do you think this decision could be reversed? And if not, what do you think the impact will be?
I do think this decision could be reversed. Whether or not it will be is a completely different question, especially, when we're seeing what might be the end of this government's time. They've been in power for 9 years. Whether or not they're going to want to reverse decisions like this or make any new large funding announcements will be an entirely different question. And then that also raises the concern of, if the government does change after the next election next year, what does that look like? And is a Conservative government actually going to be willing to pour the resources into this especially if it's not popular amongst their base.
Yeah, Nigan, you kind of touched on this, and the forces that may be behind this, with the chief of Pimicikamak Cree Nation saying where a search just happened that this reduction in funding also reflects troubling denialism regarding the true scale and significance of this issue. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, Kimberly Murray, the special interlocutor on the issue of unmarked graves, has commented a lot about this, even going so far as to suggest that this should be labeled as some kind of crime or a hate crime. Most residential school denialists, when they are talking about residential school, are talking from absolute ignorance, or maybe an anecdote or two where they hear from a certain residential school survivor that perhaps the stories of residential schools are either overblown or that they wasn't as much of the pain and abuse and death as suggested. Here's a fact. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which had reputable researchers, people with certifications, people with dozens and dozens of years of experience in research, scoured the archives, talked about the deaths of children at the schools, the abuse of children at the schools, and the fact that this is the largest blemish on Canadian history that was tantamount to genocide. That's enough. That's enough for me. And the can is open now. It's impossible to close that can, no matter how many people want to spread propaganda or lies about residential schools. The fact is that Canadians know what happened during those schools, and we still have many unanswered questions. And many of those unanswered questions could be found in the potential anomalies that suggest very much that look like unmarked graves at those sites. And we may find that some of them are not, but we may find some of them that are, and that alone will be the answers to some of those questions.
Jennifer Nigan, we'll leave it there. Appreciate you as always being here. And programming note, you can watch an encore of our episode of Face to Face with Jennifer Leywitz tonight, right here, right after the news. The Order of Manitoba is being bestowed upon a number of Indigenous people today. Details coming up after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Today's photo comes to us from Vancouver Island, where Misha George captured this scenic view of the mountains and water in Sydney, British Columbia. You can send your pictures to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be featured as our next photo of the day. Time now to take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, showers and 24 in Halifax, rain and 26 in Fredericton. 19 for Kuujjuaq and Nain, 12 with showers in Cartwright. Sun's out and 27 in Montreal, a sunny high of 25 in Val-d'Or. 26, make that 27 under the sun in Sault Ste. Marie, 26 and sunny in North Bay. 28 in Thunder Bay, 29 in Sioux Lookout. Showers and 28 in God's Lake, 26 with rain for Norway House. Rain and 30 in Winnipeg, 25 with rain in Dauphin. 27 in Regina, 23 for Saskatoon. Showers and 15 in Meadow Lake, 18 with rain in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, showers and 24 in High Level, 19 with rain in Fort Chip. 17 in showers in Edmonton, a sunny high of 27 in Lethbridge. 29 and sunny in Penticton, 21 in Vancouver. Showers and 21 for Prince George, 25 in Smithers. Rain and 25 for Old Crow, showers and 24 in Whitehorse. A sunny high of 25 in Yellowknife, 30 with showers in Norman Wells. 10 in Sax Harbor, sunny and 19 in Pawatuck. 16 for Chesterfield, 21 in Baker Lake. 2 in Resolute, 9 in Joe Haven. Today, the Order of Manitoba will be bestowed onto 12 accomplished Manitobans, 3 of whom are Indigenous. Sav Jonesa has more on who and why they're being honored.
12 Manitobans are the latest inductees into the Order of Manitoba. Those selected are being recognized with the province's highest honor for their positive contributions to the social, cultural, and economic well-being of Manitoba and its residents. 3 of the recipients are Indigenous and have made their mark on various sectors in the province.
The Honourable Murray Sinclair, who also goes by Mijana Gijek, will be recognized for his work as a lawyer, a judge, and a Canadian senator. The Anishinaabe man is well known as Manitoba's first Indigenous judge in 1988 and as the chair for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Métis Saulteaux elder May Louise Campbell will receive the Order of Manitoba for her many decades of work in the Indigenous community and Canada as a whole. Elder Campbell has used her heart and traditional knowledge to help Manitobans struggling with addictions, the justice system, and also sex trafficking victims to learn how to heal. And Cree Anishinaabe Dr. Marcia Anderson will be honored for her expertise in medicine and advocacy for the betterment of healthcare services for Indigenous people. As a medical officer and vice dean, Dr. Anderson has taught countless others about the importance of barrier-free healthcare.
Congratulations to the honorees and thank you for your lasting impact. Sav Jonesa, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks, Sav. Congrats indeed. Well, yesterday was an exciting day in the community of Six Nations of the Grand River. Fans and community members gathered in Oshkwekin to welcome home one of their own with the Stanley Cup. Here's Annette Francis with some highlights.
Wearing Florida Panther shirts and carrying signs, fans filled the streets of Washwegan, cheering on defenseman Brandon Montour as he made his way through the main street of his hometown.
Go Brandon!
The streets were shut down to traffic all day in anticipation of the large crowds. There were thousands who stood in line to get into the Oshwegan Arena.
It's nice that he won the cup. I was kind of hoping he would win it, especially in the finals there. So, you know, just nice to see somebody win.
They waited hours as they weaved around barricades. For Liz Beachy, whose son used to play minor hockey with Montour, it's well worth the wait.
We've been following Brandon's career the whole time, and we're very proud of him. He's an awesome guy, awesome kid, awesome family, and we're happy to be here.
The fans that made it inside had an opportunity to get a photo with Montour and the cup. Montour said he's happy to spend the day with family and friends in his community. He said life has been hectic, especially since signing to play with Seattle Kraken next season.
Last season was a little different. Last season, obviously, we went all the way. I had shoulder surgery, so I was, doing rehab all the way till training camp, and this year was different just because, I had to find a new team to play. So to be able to, move everything from Florida. We're going to Seattle, my wife and I, this weekend to go find a place.
No matter what team Montour plays with, the fans here say they'll support and follow him. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Six Nations of the Grand River.
What a special day that would have been. Well, that's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday, July 25th. Be sure to join us back here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That's when Creason will have your first look at the day's news. And of course, you can find the latest news and more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. Have a great night. See you back here tomorrow.